Hi everyone, my name is Anatoly and today I'll shortly tell you about interacting with Remy protocol using integration library. I'll show you small examples with JS Client of how you can communicate with Remy testnet. You can find other libraries on the GitHub and try to play with them as well. So, on the first step, you should apply to a pilot program, create RemChain account and get some free testnet tokens. There will be detailed instruction in description to this video of how you can do that and link to Block Explorer so you can check the transactions. Let's check out the Block Explorer to make sure our test transferring transaction is in the blockchain. Here is the transaction to our test addresses. And we can see the faucet web service already transferred 1000 test tokens to our account, so we can play with them. After you have an account with tokens, you should choose the test node with which you will communicate. List of available IP addresses will also be specified in the instruction, so just check out the video description. I already chose one of nodes. Here is the IP address and here is my private key with some tokens. So we have an account, tokens and writable endpoint. And there are some code samples on GitHub available, so we can check that out and play with library features. Let's move on to the code. Let's init our project. Then we need to install Remy library using npm. And let's create simple index.js file. Cool. Let's import required object. We all set. To start with it, let's create some test account using static method and log its fields. So let's output that data. So let's check this out. So here we have the public key and the private key of just creating an account. Nice, let's move on. To interact with RemChain, we need to init Remy client object with required data. Already have the private key here. And let's copy it and insert here. And we also have additional field here called network config. Basically, we should only specify node IP address. Other properties such as a API port, socket port, or SSL mode, they all will be set by default. If you have some specific value, you can set them in this object. So, basically, Remy client is a main object which has encapsulated logic for communication with nodes. For instance, Remy client has objects to interact with tokens, certificates, public keys, and etc. So let's check the balance of just created account. So let's check that out. Here we can see that there is 0 tokens stored on that account. Let's send some as far as we have test tokens on main account. We can do that by submitting a transaction using library methods, specifying public key and required demand. As a result, we should get a transaction response with batch ID, which we can use to subscribe to events later. Let's move to Block Explorer and check that the transaction with specified data about address and amount is already in ledger. Looks cool? Let's go a little bit deeper. What did just happen? There are a bunch of helper methods for node admin, and by default the node has port 8080 with REST API. At this point, all write endpoints are disabled except one, which accepts signed data. Our client library created and signed transaction and then submitted to the ledger using the writable transaction endpoint at this node. So, let's use the response which we received from the previous step to check the ledger state in code using WebSockets. The transaction response does encapsulate all logic required for eVain subscription. All we need to do is just to pass the callback with custom logic, which will be executed after the ledger state somehow changes. In this code, we output all the events which relates to the state changes. And when our batch is committed, we just recheck the balance here. We also need to import chain statuses related enum object, so we can verify the response status. Looks good. So here we have this committed status, and just right after that, we rechecked the balance and we can see that we have one RAM token. The core feature of Ramy protocol is public key storing. For example, we can create X509 SSL certificate and store its public key on trusted ledger storage using library. Then we can always check its validity and revoke at any time. Let's check this out. Using Remy client, we can check the certificate object and we will see that we have create and store method there. This method will construct X509 certificate object and sign the transaction for its public key storing. At the response, we have transaction result with encapsulated logic for socket subscription and certificate object which we can use somewhere else in business logic layer. Cool! Here we can see the batch ID of public key store transaction. Let's check the Explorer to see the transaction status. Here we can see that our public key is stored on the ledger. Here's our public key data, the public key type, the hash of the certificate, valid dates, and if we'll go to the storage, we will see that we have additional revoked field. Just like we did with token transferring operations, we can subscribe to events and pass callback, so let's check that out. Just right after the transaction is submitted, we will send a request to check if certificate's public key is valid. It means that the dates are still okay and it's not revoked yet. Here is the batch ID. Here we have the information that transaction is committed and the status on the chain is okay. So let's revoke the cert using the same client. All we need to do is to call the revoke method of Ramy client at certificate object. So it will sign the revocation transaction. Basically, just right after the certificate is committed, we will check its status and then we will send the revocation transaction and then we will subscribe to WebSockets to check when the transaction is committed, and just right after it will be revoked, we will check its state again and say if it's revoked or not. Cool. So everything is fine. We created the certificate, we store the public key on the Rem chain, and then we send a transaction to revoke it, and here we can see the certificate is revoked. Let's check the ledger state data using Block Explorer. So here's the revocation transaction. And here's our public key. And if we will go to the storage, we will see that it's already has been revoked. There are some other nice features in JS library and Remy protocol. You can find all the examples on the GitHub. Please feel free to reach us out on the Discord if you have any questions. That's pretty it. Thank you for your attention.